We are starting our third session. Embedded Poland, Science, Views and Memory and Ultra-Orthodox Israeli Jewry. This is the title of it. And we have the pleasure to open this day with the rabbinical session, actually. We have two rabbis and scholars. And two of them are connected to the Adheina Institute. And to be precise, I will quote from the official paper. Adheina is a learning and research institute dedicated to the study of the Torah creations of Galician and Bukovinian Jewry from the 16th century to the present day. The center seeks to create a broad academic foundation which will bring together Torah expertise, scholarship, modern research methods, and historical thinking. It aims to achieve this by integrating budding Haredi researchers into scientific research endeavors. So our guest maybe will develop this in the presentations, what the Institute is all about. And the first person I have a pleasure to introduce is Rabbi Yehuda Aaron Horowitz, who is now presently the chief rabbi, the rabbi in Munich. And actually he functions as a rabbi in different places. But he's also a leading expert in rabbinic history and journalism. He published dozens of books, articles, projects regarding bibliographic studies and deciphering ancient manuscripts. So please, Rabbi Horowitz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Chodesh Tov, Rosh Chodesh Adar, Marbim B'Simcha. So I'm very happy now to begin this session regarding Polish Jewry in Israel today. And in the following lecture, I'd like to demonstrate how the Ultra-Orthodox society in Israel today can be described as an offshoot of Polish Jewish culture in many aspects of its daily lifestyle and rituals. Polish Jewish symbols are cultural expressions in styles of dress, language, food, music, names of communities, names of locations and institutions. The Poland I'm referring to is the Congress Poland, or it used to be called Russisch Poland. I will begin with the beginning of what we call Polish Jewry in Israel. Can be compared a bit like the foreign cultures or enclaves of thriving communities in the midst of the modern world, like Little Italy, Little China, in various immigrant cities like we had in the East End in London, in the east side of New York, the Pletzel of Paris. The Jews tried to recreate their shtetl experience in the new country, but that was more by the Landsmannschaften, more for the purpose of making it easier experience for the immigrants as they arrived in the new shores. Less, I would say, even the purpose was to try and integrate into, for example, the American society in an easier way, in a smoother manner. Whereas in the case of what I call the beginnings of the Colloquium in Yerushalayim, that began with the middle of the 19th century initiatives of housing projects for the fledgling various communities in the cramped old city of Jerusalem to have some breathing space, they began opening what was called Eiser, Warsaw Eiser, Rodner Eiser, Ungerscheiser. These all exist till today, by the way, and they also have the same names. Although, let's say, Horodner Eiser, which is Grodner, is in Yerushalmi accent, Narodner Eiser. I don't know where they get that name from, but that's what it's called. And Warsaw Eiser was established by Kollel Polin. Till today, in many places in the world, you find this tzedakah pushka. But this began as an initiative of the Polish Kollel. Kollel means not what we call today Kollel, where people sit and learn after they get married. Rather, Kollel means the agent responsible for collecting financial support from the home countries of various immigrants to Israel to support those people of those descent. For example, a Jew comes from Poland, 1870, to live in Jerusalem, has no means of support. There is the Kollel, like an office that collects money from the various Polish Jews in the world to support that Jew from Poland. And so Kollel Chabad, Kollel Volin, Kollel Vilna, every country Initially, there were in the 18th century only 2 or 3 kollelim, Hasidim and Prushim, a few more, and then a long time, many kollelim. There was even Kollel America, exists till today, by the way. So the Kollel of Polin established also homes for the poor, for the Polish immigrants, called Botei Warsche. As you walk down from Jaffa Road to Kikar Shabbat, the central budding or very central busy downtown Haredi Jerusalem in Geula, this is the beginning to your right. It begins Mea Shearim, and there's a long row of homes called Botei Warsche. And most residents there have to or do claim descent from Poland. So initially this isn't a kind of little Poland, but rather a solution for poor Jews to find where to live, supported by Kollel Polin. This is till today. So Botei Warsche also became a bit small, and many Polish Jews were still seeking a place to live. This is from the other side, the entrance. On the entrance, you'll see even donated by a Jew from Lublin. But the name of the homes are Botei Warsche, because Warsaw was the largest, at that time, supporting city. It was named for Warsaw, but apparently this area was donated by a Jew from Lublin. When I was a child, there was a very interesting architect that built egg boxes, supposedly homes. It was a very interesting architectural experiment in the hills of Ramot, outside Jerusalem, and no one wanted to live there, because outside it looks interesting, but inside it's a bit difficult to live in a kind of diagonal, horizontal, vertical way. You get confused. I have relatives living here, and it's very interesting. We come into the house, you don't know where you are, like in an egg box. Anyway, so the Kollel Polin made a nice deal. They got it for very cheap and gave these homes for anyone who could claim any Polish descent in Jerusalem. And today it's actually an expensive neighborhood, because many of them did some renovations inside. They used the egg box. It goes like this. So, for example, I had a relative, he brought a carpenter and he built certain beds coming out of the wall and tables coming out of the wall. Anyway, recently I heard that they're going to destroy it and build new buildings. But this is Ramot Polin in Jerusalem. So if you want to know in Jerusalem where Little Poland is, I don't know if it's Little Poland, but it has the name at least. Come mid-1920s, a large wave of ultra-Orthodox Polish Jews begin investing in Israel, and actually the Ger Rebbe from his court this is the Gura Kalavaria, it's still today, the Beis Medrash of the Imrei Emes, 1924 he announced. That's when the announcement of the Rebbe was usually Rosh Hashanah, when all the Hasidim come to the Shil, to the Hoif, to the Chotzer of the Rebbe, and he announced that people should try and move to Eretz Yisrael, then British mandate. It was easier to do business here in Tel Aviv, and many Hasidim came to Israel on pilot trips and on business trips and invested. And this is where, and that's when he founded his yeshiva in Jerusalem, Sfas Emes. This is next to Machne Yehuda, the market, the famous market. Across the road from the market is where he's buried, the Imrei Emes, the Ger Rebbe. And the Hasidim also built a replica of the previous, of this building right here. It's only a wall, by the way, there's nothing behind this wall. It's just the wall, and next to it is the tombstone of the Rebbe. Anyway, when these Hasidim came to Yerushalayim, they, as opposed to the first Haredi Olim in the 19th century and before that came to Yerushalayim, adopted the Yerushalmi dress. By the way, the Yerushalmi dress has in it Arab elements or Bedouin clothing, attire. Besides the hat, everything else looked almost like the Bedouin dress. Actually, the golden stripes, it has a name in Yiddish, Damascus. It has a they used to bring it from Damascus. And the old Yishuv, what we call the early Haredi settlers of Palestine, the 19th century, even people that came from Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, all over, adopted the norms or rituals and dress of the locale, like the Lelov Hasidim that came from the Rebbe of Lelov. Also, till today, Lelov Hasidim, although being Polish, they adopted the Yerushalmi dress. But when the Ger Hasidim came, or those types came from in the 20s, they did not adopt the Yerushalmi dress, but rather maintained their hometown or Polish, the same attire as in Poland, besides the hat we'll talk about soon. So actually, in a sense, there were some frictions later, actually recently even some frictions between the old Polish Jews of Yerushalayim, Botei Warsaw Jews, with the Ger Hasidim over certain things. But now I will now discuss how the actual imaginary landscape and surroundings of the Ultra-Orthodox in Israel are the spiritual ones, as we find from the famous Ponevezh Rav. When he established the Ponevezh Yeshiva, he had in mind to establish for every shtetl in Lithuania with the yeshiva, establish also a similar yeshiva in Israel, because he thought that the way to commemorate the memory of the martyrs of Eastern Europe was by building or rebuilding the spiritual values of that Jewry, rather than having streets or planting trees and things like that. So the spiritual meaning of the name of the town, that had the Hasidic court or yeshiva, surpasses and is elevated to a very high sphere, by far higher than the physical significance of the name of the place. So East European Polish lifestyles of old that don't exist anymore in real life are those things that define day-to-day Haredi life in Israel, as opposed to the intention of the founders of the State of Israel to impose the idea to forget and leave out ingredients of Jewish diaspora and develop a new modern Israeli Jew. Polish ultra-Orthodoxy didn't comply at all, as they continue to identify themselves as Strykov Jews, Alexander Jews, Guraz Jews, Lubliner Hasidim, and so that was the way they define themselves. As a result, the names of their institutions bear those same names. So the names of institutions don't come as a way to commemorate the towns of origin, but are rather simple, automatic, natural names of the groups. So you ask a Ger Chosid, what's the meaning of being a Ger Chosid? It's not because Gura Kalavaria was destroyed by the Nazis in Poland, and therefore I'm kind of reliving that to commemorate it. It's just to continue his life as the way it was in Gur. So actually the attachment to a certain Hasidic group or yeshiva defines the self-perception of the Haredi. The type of attire is part of it. The way I'm dressed, I'm kind of announcing I'm a Litvische Haredi in Israel, Lithuanian Haredi in Israel. The way a Ger Chosid would dress, he announces by the way he dresses that he belongs to that very group. So the typical way of the Gur Polish dress is the round hat and long black coat. But we'll see soon, this is a normal Haredi gathering, at some protest maybe or something. And you see various types of dress. The majority are wearing black hats and black coats. But if you are Haredi, or if you know the Haredi group very well, you will be able to identify each person by the way he dresses to what group he belongs to. Which is Toldot Aaron, which is Litvish. This looks like Litvish, Yerushalmi, Polish. Each one with his own way of dress. This is actually, I took this picture last week in the Kotel. I went to Daven Mincha there, and I just took this picture, and here's a Polish Hasidic Jew, probably a Amshinov, or Radzin, or Mozhitz, and this is the Ger Chosid, because of the socks. So the Ger Hasidim will always wear, on Shabbos, the spodik, the tall shtreimel, and in the week, the round hat, but always with the trousers tucked in the socks. The alleged reason was to avoid trousers from getting stained from the mud in the ancient Polish shtetl. So why is it considered so important? The Ger Chosid can't, chas v'sholem, let his trousers touch his shoes. What's the big deal? Another example would be the hat. The hat of the Polish Jews was, till the Holocaust, a dashikel. Dashikel is a casquette, like a kind of a cap. And today only Belzer Hasidim, the children only, on Shabbos wear it. You won't find any Hasid in Israel with the dashikel. They changed it to a spodik. In Poland, it was a VIP hat, or a rabbi, or an important rich person would wear it. But it became way to identify all Congress Polish Hasidim in Israel, whether Mozhitz, Amshinov, Alexander, Radzin, Strikov, they all wear the spodik. But the Gul, therefore, had to distinguish themselves with the what's called Hosensocken, with the socks covering, or the trousers tucked into the socks. So dress code issues are even very crucial in Israel, as the spiritual landscape is so much more condensed. In the same street you have Breslev, Toldot Aron, Lithuanians, Alexander Strikov, Amshinov, Mozhitz, Geras, sometimes in Rehov Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Brak, or in Geula you have in Mea Shearim about 20 dozen types of Hasidic groups, all condensed in one geographical area. So the Hasidim had an even more important role to identify themselves with a special way of dress. For example, I'll give one example of how a Hasidic group develops today. As I'm talking to you right now, when a Hasidic Rebbe passes away, and all the children want to also inherit the throne of the Rebbe, they try and look for a name of a shtetl where one of the ancestors lived in, and they open a new Hasidic group. Like the Biala Rebbe in Yerushalayim, there was one Biala Rebbe with the very few Hasidim. He actually lived next to the Ger Rebbe in Makor Baruch. When he passed away about 25 years ago, all 5 sons became Rebbes. So how do they identify themselves? So one is Biale Pshische, one is Biale Porzive, Biale Ostrove, Biale Lenchno, Biale Porisov. And today one of those brothers passed away, and his children all want to be Rebbes. So there's Biale Kalish, Biale Lenchno, and so forth and so on. So many Polish towns, as I'm talking to you now, are suddenly gaining new ground in Israel. Even a town like Borisov, that yesterday someone said the kids, they're embarrassed to come from there. But in Israel, it became a Hasidic group. Since the Hasidic group tries to continue and also identify themselves as part of that Polish shtetl by getting the name attached to the Hasidic group. And these are various Polish courts, Biale, you can see Lelov, and so forth and so on. Here, this is one interesting example. The Slonim, although it's not Poland, it was Poland before the war. The two rival groups, when the Slonim Rebbe was passed away, there was the son-in-law the son wanted to be the Rebbe, and another relative. They're called Schwarze Hasidim and Weiße Hasidim. The more extreme are Schwarze, the more open ones are Weiße. But they had a big court case, and they decided, the judges made some kind of compromise, that the Schwarze should take the Yiddish name of Slonim. That means the way it's written in Hebrew is with the Aleph, like in Yiddish. And the Weiße, the more institutionalized one, should have the name Slonim with a Vov, the way it's spelled in Hebrew. So it's the same Hasidic group with the same name, but spelled differently, and that actually works till today, and there's no fight, and there's two Hasidic groups, one Slonim with the Aleph and one Slonim. And how do we identify it when we talk? One is Slanim and one Slonim. It's just one way of finding. Bnei Brak is the largest Haredi city in Israel, founded by Polish Jews. When it decided to establish a park to commemorate the Warsaw Shoah victims, the city of Bnei Brak planted one tree and one bench next to it in the middle of the main road, Rabbi Akiva. By contrast, this is what's called Gan Varsha, the Warsaw International Park. There's hardly a tree. It's a bit of a joke that people make. But I think it's not a joke. I mean, it's true. The park isn't so important. What commemorates in the eyes of the Haredi Jews the Warsaw victims isn't parks or streets, but rather, as opposed to maybe kibbutzim and many other places that have big monuments to commemorate Warsaw Jewry, the Haredim commemorate by yeshivas and shtiblach, and even, I would say more, by continuing the same lifestyle as before. When we come to food, we have still in the Haredi shops gefilte fish betam polani, and kigel and pacha, and all these foods of Polish Jews, herring. And these became normal Yiddish foods, but most of them originate from Polish Jewry. When we speak of language, although Yiddish, the Polish Hasidim aren't very extreme in the anti-Zionist views, like some of the Hungarian Hasidic groups or Galiciana Hasidic groups that try and speak Yiddish. The majority of the Polish Hasidim speak Hebrew at home, Hebrew outside, but when they learn in yeshivas, it's usually in Yiddish with a very heavy Polish accent. And that's where the language finds itself a bit more alive. Whereas overseas, also the Polish Hasidim speak Yiddish, like the Ger Hasidim in Borough Park, in London, in Antwerp speak Yiddish, but in Israel they speak Hebrew. When it comes to music, I'm going to be a bit sure I don't have much time. So I'd like to just a few minutes speak about the music. I just took as an example in order to explain or crystallize what the Ger music is like, or the Polish elements of Ger music, compare it to Mozhitz. Mozhitz is the most musical Hasidic group. Every year, not only did they compose before the war many nigunim on the Polish, in the Mozhitz Polish style, but one of the elements of these Hasidic groups is that every year they continue composing in the same style of music new compositions, and Mozhitz is very famous for that. This is a picture of Rebbe Tzion Schenker, the very most famous composer of Mozhitz Nigunim, with the Rebbe sitting here, and one of the old Hasidim trying to see if he's singing it correctly, and you can see all the Hasidim trying to get the Nigun right. I'll just give you a very short example of Mozhitz Nigunim with the Tish. This is a Yortzeit of one of the Rebbe's. That's why they're not wearing a shtreimel. It's not on Shabbos. But I don't know why it's... Oh, the melancholic, inspirational song. It doesn't show on the film, but you can see it here. Okay, that's enough. You get the picture or the sound. Now I'm coming to the Ger Hasidim. And here, really, here I just have to explain one thing. The Ger sees itself as continuation of Pshischad and Kotsk, which left a bit the Derech Hasidus of the Baal Shem Tov, the Slavus, the Dveikus. Actually, the Kotzker was very to the point and very into truth, and no external expressions of Hasidus, and actually very reserved. When they daven, the Geras daven very quick and show no movement even. And the davening is usually sometimes even the prayers, the liturgy, the prayers, the way they sing it is no song even. It's when they say Kaddish, it's a way of a bit like military orders. And that's the way they talk also. Everything is short and to the point. And it's a bit of a rough Hasidus. That means they are rough to each other because they want to work on this, what they call Midas or Emes. I won't go into the Hasidic thought process of it, but I just want to show how the music of the Ger Hasidim sometimes sounds like...
Marsh Kaddish.
You'll listen to the march. Okay, so we find obviously Slichot Minag Polin. This is the general Polish minag, but the Ger Hasidim, in a sense, infiltrated into the Hasidic music. We have many Polish elements. So the tradition of Ger, as I said, carries these elements. as opposed to other Hasidic groups in Poland. But I would say that the entire Hasidic group of Gur runs a bit like an army. Every Chassid has a commandant. Commandant in Polish means officer, no? So, and the commandant tells him what to do, and it's run a bit like an army. You don't want to meet a protest of Ger Hasidim. I was once at a levaya, a funeral of someone, and the Ger Rebbe came to visit the funeral, and the amount of pushing there was unbelievable. It was actually dangerous, because they have this thing of every Chassid has a desire to see the Rebbe, and they're supposed to push to see the Rebbe. It's part of the Hasidus. I won't go into it. So Haredi lifestyle is set on continuum and on refusal to change even the folklore and trivial elements of lifestyles as a measure of opposition to modern enlightened movements as part of the even trivial things like shape, color of dress, or way of clothes, the way the clothes are buttoned. The names of the groups or yeshiva remains also the same, as if to say, we continue the life of before the Shoah, as if this life never vanished. So the place name is more than a name of a Polish town. It's transcendental because it bears an idea. It's in the sphere of spiritual content and guiding light to the lives of so many Jews that see themselves as living as Polish Jews in Israel, in modern Israel today. So if we take Roman Vishniak's famous Vanished World, or this is a book from the Israeli Ministry of Education, Olam Yehudi shene'elam, vanished and disappeared. True, the world is gone geographically, but many of its elements and even the actual names of locals are in the eyes of Haredi Jews alive and kicking through dozens of ultra-Orthodox Torah and Hasidic institutions that continue their native Polish Jewish culture. From the ultra-Orthodox perspective, the Polish Jewish world in Israel continues in full force. The various Hasidic groups are competing for self-determination measured by who is closer to the original Jewish Polishness or Polish Jewishness. The Israeli space is so much more condensed in comparison to the East European one, thus causing far more varieties of the physical expression of the various Jewish Polish identities. Like we had the Bundist and secular movements established neighborhoods in Israel named after shtetls, as described in an article by Gali Drucker, Makom Yenachem. But these were short-lived and hardly exist today, in contrast to the Haredi Polish enclaves that are thriving and growing exponentially. As we talk right now, this is one example of a family of Ger Hasidim. You can see the grandfather. These are the grandparents. And these are the grandchildren. These are the children. So this society is growing exponentially, and obviously all see themselves as very, very, what they call Shalfe Hasidim. Shalf means very, very strong Hasidim. So the land of Israel that served as a dream for 2 millennia finally became a tangible, materialized dream. Poland, on the other hand, that was a real venue for millennia, turned into the dream. The loss of the Polish Jewish world even caused the glorified idyllic romantic that was spoken about yesterday, nostalgia of the supposedly wonderful spiritual world that existed in the original places that represent the various Hasidic groups. The recent returns of Haredim to visit the physical locales, that until then only symbolize a transcendental locale, may well in a sense change this attitude. The imaginary space of the town is far more significant and plays a more crucial role than the physical locale. Let me illustrate it with a small shtetl called Kotsk. Very few ultra-Orthodox are interested in or even have any idea or know anything of a physical Kotsk, where it is and what significance the shtetl has. But this word Kotsk, the word Kotsk, has created a way of life that has become and serves until today very vital ideas in the ultra-Orthodox outlook and lifestyle, but I would say not even ultra-Orthodox. This is an article I saw 2 weeks ago in a Bnei Akiva periodical. He's a controversial rabbi, Rabbi Tal, but they call him Kotsk Shluchat Yad Binyamin. Yad Binyamin is a national religious kibbutz or moshav, and he's a rabbi there. כן, הם יסדו את זה, אבל זה עכשיו זה שמגורשי גוש קטיף. And it's just an example of how Kotsk serves as an idea more than a place. So one example is this example shows that the idea of Kotsk is very well alive, but not as a place, as a geographical place, rather as an idea. And this permeates the way of thinking and acting of so many Haredim in Israel. I will end off with what yesterday some mentioned, Heschel's beautiful statement of Horowitz, Karlin, Gul, Lublin, Breslev, all these names and hundreds of other villages and shtetl became like holy books. Every place has its own distinct content, its own face, expresses the name Mezhibuz or Bedichevuz. I should add on Lublin or Kotsk or Gel or Mozhitz. That name makes him feel as if he pronounced a holy name. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Horowitz, for your interesting presentation. And the next speaker is Rabbi Israel Malkiel, also from Adheina Institute. And now he's working on his PhD at the Department of Jewish History at the Tel Aviv University. Among other things, he served as a Jewish chaplain for the University of Cambridge. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'll speak, Rabbi Yehuda spoke about Ultra-Orthodox society in Israel as Polish through all the physical sides, and I'll speak about halacha, about Polish halacha, Polish Jewish law, current Polish Jewish law in Israel. In the halachic literature, there is extensive space for discussion about the question of local custom, the minhag hamakom, and about the way in which this goes along with the movement of individuals and small groups from a place of one custom to another. As a general background, I'll mention the passages in the Mishnah, the Talmudic passages, Mishnah in Psachim, drawing the following outlines. I'm quoting: "He who goes from a place where they work," the context is the day of Erev Pesach, the eve of Pesach, when they had different customs, whether is it permitted to do work or not. So he who goes from a place where they work to a place where they do not work, or from a place where they do not work to a place where they do work, we lay upon him the restrictions of the place that he has left and the restrictions of the place to which he has gone. And a man must not act differently from local custom on account of the quarrels which could or would arise. So here we see the aspiration to keep the balance between the fixed customs of a certain community and the fact that there is a natural movement of people from place to place. The local customs always have superiority over the individuals who are expected to accept the customs of their new habitat. However, while still being immigrant or maybe expatriates, they are obliged to keep the restrictions of their previous place as long as they are still tied to another cultural space. So people move and they're supposed to eventually change the custom, but there is some time period where they're still tied to the previous place, and we have this kind of struggle or attempt to balance it. Nevertheless, the classical sources dealt mainly with movement of individuals into existing stable communities and not with big groups of people moving to a new homeland. In those texts, the place is the fixed, the stable, and geographically identified factor, whereas the individuals move along the line between such places and therefore between different local customs. The ultimate and quick severance of Jewish existence from Poland as a result of the 2 world wars and the Holocaust created a new situation, although not without precedents, some of which on a large scale, such as the Spanish expulsion in the 15th century and others, in which new Jewish communities were established in many places around the globe by groups or leading individuals who, in their perception, changed only their physical location, but continued their previous cultural being, bringing with them the whole set of social, cultural, and legal systems associated with the old geographical location. Thus, East European Jewish adjudicators continue to apply halachic, legal principles whose source of authority is based in a certain, in this context, Polish geographical space, in a totally different location. As I will show, this is specifically remarkable due to the unique characteristics of the Polish rite within the Jewish legal tradition, which gives central place to the customs and traditions of local communities in halachic questions of all sorts. So the parameter of the minhag hamakom, the local place custom, is very, very central in halachic thinking, especially in Polish halachic thinking. If we take a look at the work of the senior legal authority of the Jewish community in Poland and in Europe as well, the Rema, Rabbi Moses Isserles of the 16th century in Krakow, who was the main figure in the formation of modern Ashkenazi halacha, and examine his system of decision-making, will clearly see how central and in common use in his writing is the principle of the custom of these regions. So this is a phrase that he coined, minhag medinot elu, or minhag glilot elu, the custom of these regions, referring to Polish regions, Central Europe regions. The Rema, who was himself the son of an immigrant family, reflects in his halachic enterprise the process of migrating communities between different regions and its expressions on the perception of cultural continuity. Medieval German Jewish communities were defined by localized sets of customs, varying largely from town to town, and this characteristic is the background to the halachic term coined by the Rema, the custom of these regions, as I said, minhag medinot elu. From Rema's point of view, the Polish communities were extensions of and successors to the old communities of the Rhine Valley, an imagined Jewish German territory, and thus the political multiplicity of the German principalities is reflected in the halachic terms, these regions. According to this position, a main component of every halachic ruling is the local custom upon which the ancient European communities were based. This principle appears in Rema's writing as a main consideration in dozens of cases, in many of which against the law as it appears in the canonical Jewish texts such as the Talmud. Such cases cover the entire range of Jewish legal issues, from day-to-day questions dealing with daily practice, festivals, liturgy, and laws of kosher food, to details of family purity, procedures relating to the production of legal documents, and many more. This fairly short introduction to the work of Rema describes a well-known and pretty well-researched phenomenon. In my presentation, I'll elaborate on the challenge of immigrant Polish Jews in continuing this tradition of legal thinking outside of its geographical origin. I'll try to show how analysis of the work of some producers of Jewish legal materials in Israel in the second half of the 20th century, from the above perspective, can contribute to the understanding of what I'll call the struggle over space in Israel, the new Jewish state. Palestine, later to become Israel, was in the first half of the 20th century a place of accelerated establishment and development of numerous new communities. As Rabbi Horowitz mentioned, in the 20s, big numbers of Ultra-Orthodox Jewish people came over, and more. From the perspective of an immigrant Zionist eye, those communities were all supposedly, since they were newly founded, neutral custom-wise. And indeed, in the first years of its existence, one of the main goals of the chief rabbinate of Israel, prior even to the establishment of the state, during the British Mandate, was to form a united legal system based, due to stronger Ashkenazi influence inside it, mainly on the Ashkenazi European right. The Sephardi right, however, has its own legacy regarding the question of the legal hegemony over the land of Israel, based on a conception of cultural and legal continuity rather than on a Zionist conception of emptiness. Rabbi Joseph Caro, the 16th century author of the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, argued that historically the Sephardi Jews have the legal hegemony over the land of Israel due to their earlier habitation of these regions. Thus, every Ashkenazi Jew that arrived and settled there during these years was nullified. And he actually uses the halachic term of bitul, nullification, as an individual in the Sephardi group, and was never counted with other Ashkenazi Jews to form a separate community. The late Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, former chief rabbi of Israel and the most senior and prominent Sephardi authority in the last century, expanded this perception significantly, arguing in numerous adjudications that the land of Israel, from a Jewish legal perspective, is not a neutral space, bearing no fixed local custom, but rather, in his words, and I'm quoting, the space of our teacher, of the author of the Shulchan Aruch. He is the master of the land of Israel, and all its residents have accepted his teachings, whatever he would say, either towards leniency or stringency. In Rabbi Ovadia Yosef's opinion, the communities in Israel are obliged to follow the rulings of Rabbi Karo, the symbol of Sephardi Jews and their leading authority, even if those communities are newly established, even if the individuals creating it are originally of Ashkenazi European origin. The land of Israel and all the regions surrounding it are categorically classified as the place of our teacher, a concept based on the Sephardi historical ownership of them. In contrast to both the Sephardi approach and to what I described as an immigrant Zionist approach, I would like to argue that Polish East European adjudicators presented a third way. I'll title it The Concept of the Roaming Cultural Space, and will illustrate it with examples from the work of two contemporary Polish-Israeli rabbis. As I mentioned before, one of the prominent characteristics of Ashkenazi halacha is the extensive weight that custom is given among other legal considerations, and the central role of Ramah in forming and shaping this concept. Ramah's status as the leading legal authority of Ashkenazi halacha of modern East European Jewry was fantastically coined in the 19th century by the Khatam Sofer in his famous expression based on the verse in Exodus 14:8. I'm quoting, and the children of Israel were marching out with high hand. Bnei Yisrael yotzim beyad ramah in the Exodus. And with high hand, beyad ramah in Hebrew, can be also translated as by the leading hand of Ramah, Rabbi Moses Isserles. This expression, although referring to the children of Israel as a whole, was evidently describing the Ashkenazi world solely, being led by Ramah's enterprise to preserve, codify, and centralize the local community's customs. Given this background, it is important to point out that rabbinic adjudicators of Polish origin continued, and still do, to use this principle as a determinant factor in halachic debates, including, of course, in Israel. This can be exemplified in a responsum written in Jerusalem in 1976 by Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss, which I wish to quote. We accepted upon ourselves the rulings of Ramah as they were given from Sinai, or as if they were given from Sinai. There's a question how to translate the Hebrew. He says, Kintinatan misinai. So it says, as they were given from Sinai, or as if they were given from Sinai, as the well-known expression, and now he's quoting Khatam Sofer's expression, and the children of Israel are led by the Ramah. Rabbi Weiss was born in Galicia in 1902, and after spending about 30 years in England, in Manchester, he arrived in Israel in the late 70s to serve as the head of the Eda Haredit in Yerushalayim, one of the leading bodies of the Ultra-Orthodox world in Israel. Rabbi Weiss uses this expression as a halachic principle, despite being already situated hundreds of miles away from the regions where Ramah developed his halachic approach and where his authority was originally established. Thus, from Rabbi Weiss's perspective, the Ashkenazi community carries its geographically affiliated cultural heritage with it to its new location and can therefore continue to apply it as if nothing has changed. The land of Israel isn't a neutral space, nor is it historically Sephardi territory. It is what we make of it. It is what we bring with us. But I wish to go ahead and present a more radical expression of this position. This will be by the figure of Rabbi Yekutiel Yehuda Halberstam, the late Rebbe of Kloisenburg, Tzanz. Rabbi Halberstam was born in Poland in 1905 and died in Israel in 1994. After surviving Nazi concentration camps, losing his wife and 11 children, he rebuilt his community in America and later in Israel, being an inspirational figure and spiritual leader for thousands of followers. Rabbi Halberstam is well known for his uncompromising approach towards any change in Jewish life and legal standards. He was an active and vital religious leader. Apart from being an address to individuals and a producer of a 7-volume corpus of halachic responsa, he also established a thriving Hasidic neighborhood in the Israeli city of Netanya, which consists of synagogues, schools, community institutions, and even a modern hospital, the Leniado Hospital in Netanya was established by him. Rabbi Halberstam named the mentioned neighborhood in Netanya the Tzanz quarter, Kiryat Tzanz, after the city of Novi Tzanz in southern Poland, where his great-grandfather served as the rabbi of the Jewish community and founded the Hasidic dynasty of Tzanz. As we will see, the choice of name wasn't arbitrary. For Rabbi Halberstam, it encompassed the core of his activity to re-establish the old world, which was ruined in the Holocaust, in the new, almost empty space of the new state of Israel. I'll try to demonstrate Rabbi Halberstam's approach using a halachic polemic, which is the dispute over the calculation or the construction of time in Jewish law. Jewish legal authorities in the Middle Ages have disagreed over the question of how day and night are determined. There are, in generally speaking, two main sides to this conflict. One argued that the night, i.e. the sunset, starts when the body of the sun goes down under the horizon. The other held that the sun sets only considerably later, about an hour after the seen sunset. The decision in this dispute has numerous halachic implications. Basically, any detail in Jewish life that is dependent on time is influenced by it. Traditionally in Europe, since early times, the tendency was to follow the second opinion, while in modern Israel, due to different factors, the common custom was to follow the first, the more reasonable, modernly reasonable at least, opinion. With regard to the most common implication of this halachic matter, the times of the beginning and the end of the Sabbath, writes Rabbi Halberstam in a letter to members of his community in Kiryat Tzanz, the Tzanz neighborhood, Netanya, and I'm quoting a fairly long letter. I hereby announce that at our place, i.e. the Tzanz neighborhood in Netanya, the custom is to accept the Sabbath while the sun is still at the top of the palm trees, i.e. quite early. And with regard to the end of the Sabbath, the halacha was already established to follow the opinion of our teacher Rabbeinu Tam, who is the representative of the first opinion, the later opinion. And this was the custom fixed in most of Jewish diasporas in Poland and Galicia. And also the Hungarian regions who followed the rulings of the Khatam Sofer, the famous 19th century adjudicator which I mentioned before, and his disciples similarly. And therefore I asked of all our people, especially those whose ancestors were part of the Tzanz followers, to follow this opinion. And at least this place, at this place, the Tzanz neighborhood is a place where they are accustomed to be forbidding. And this is a quote from halachic literature, Makom shenagu bo isur, a place where they are accustomed to be forbidden. So the Kiryat Tzanz, the Tzanz neighborhood, is Makom shenagu bo isur. It's a place where they are accustomed to be forbidding. And continuing, and also its name testifies that it was built and established to follow the rulings and customs of my great-grandfather, the Divrei Chaim, the famous halachic and Hasidic leader of the 19th century. And it is therefore his place, the Divrei Chaim's place. Therefore I ask and urge the residents as well as the guests in Kiryat Tzanz to strictly keep the Sabbath according to our custom here, as was set in our calendar. So one side, the Sephardi, in this struggle over space, claims for historical hegemony on the land of Israel based on the historical narrative of continuous Sephardi custom in the region. The Ashkenazi side, on the other hand, or the Polish side, on the other hand, uses legal concepts affiliated geographically with another place, with Europe, Poland, Galicia, and Hungary, and claims priority or at least equality by copying the physical location with all what it bears to the new space, which, almost in a colonial way, allows it. A colonial way in the sense that a no man's land, that when we come from, wherever we come from, we can just bring it and apply it. Phrases such as its name testified, which I quoted before, or it was built and established to follow the rulings and customs of my great-grandfather, the Divrei Chaim, enable this shift, and the Talmudic principle stating that we lay upon him the restrictions of the place to which he has gone is applied to whoever comes into the neighborhoods into the neighborhood. These few square miles on the Mediterranean shore, which were transformed due to the establishment of the immigrating community to a proper European Jewish territory. The Polish Jewish community, which thrived on this land for hundreds of years and was violently and abruptly uprooted from its cradle, as we see now, it didn't vanish. It's not only did it vanish here and continuing and growing, but it also didn't vanish. It still exists and continues to thrive and develop in its new habitat in Israel, legally, halachically speaking. I'll finish with a famous tradition regarding the founder of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, whose lifetime desire to leave the exile and settle in the Holy Land couldn't be fulfilled. And he was buried in Mezhibuzh, now in Ukraine. The Hasidic tradition is that a narrow strip of the land of Israel is laid under the Baal Shem Tov's gravestone in the town of Mezhibuzh, which consequently bears its holiness. In our case, the mystical traditions regarding the possibility of the physical space to roam from place to place are still active, but the roles are reversed. Instead of the desirable Eretz Yisrael coming to Poland, Poland now moves to Eretz Yisrael. Thank you very much.
Comments, please. There is a moving mic, but please have a seat in here.
Why don't you take one?
Oh, but we hear you. Yes?
Okay.
They need the microphone for the recording.
Okay, so let's give you one.
Thank you for both very interesting talks. I would like to know from the first talk, basically, one group for me was missing, and these are the women. And I would like to know about, like, about their dress or in the public sphere. Do they have a place in the public sphere, and is it the same as was?
As I mentioned, because the Congress Polish Hasidim usually are not extreme. They aren't Zionist, but they were never anti-Zionist. Hence, they came to Israel in the 20s already. Hence, the Ger Rebbe, the present one, is one of the richest Jews in Israel because his father, at the behest of his grandfather, already invested in land between Caesarea and Tel Aviv. And then, I won't go into the political side, Litzman, who's now the minister he helped him, מה שנקרא להפשיר קרקעות, וככה הוא נהיה מיליונר. I won't go into that, but that's why the Ger Hasidim are the most, that's why the Ger Hasidim, the largest Hasidic group, the most powerful one also politically. But the point is, they are not extreme. That's why they also don't speak Yiddish at home, because they go to be they're part of the Bet Yaakov movement. The Bet Yaakov movement was an all-inclusive movement. It was the Polish movement of Bet Yaakov transplanted into Israel, but at least when I was growing up, they all learned together with all other groups, Sfaradi, Litai, they're all in one school, and therefore the Moetzet Dolei Torah, the Council of Torah sages, including the Ger Rebbe, they all consented and agreed, and we're happy to agree that the studies should all be in Hebrew, and the dress is also the same. You cannot, when you're walking in the street, identify who's a Ger woman or not, or a Litvische woman. You can identify sometimes by seeing where the husband is. The Ger husband is about 2 miles further, and the Litvische wife is with the husband. But that's already a different story. I won't go into that. You cannot identify so much women to what group they belong to. You can identify sometimes women if they belong to the Hungarian, Galician Hasidic groups. They usually cover their hair. Some of them wear a small sheitel, like a wig, with a covering, with a head covering. Some of them only cover. Some of the Galician Hasidim, the women even shave their head after they get married. And this is already something else. Actually, the Polish Hasidim, Congress Polish Hasidim, were against this. And sometimes, I have a friend in London, he married a Hungarian from Galician Hasidus, I think she's maybe even Satmar, whatever, and he comes from Lelov, and it caused a fight in the marriage, sort of. He didn't want his wife to be with a shaven head, and by them it's one of the 10 commandments, the wife has shaven, although there's no halachic source for it. So he wrote now an academic work. He started researching it. He sent me a month ago an academic, it looks like a doctorate, on this peculiar custom of Jews, women, that after they get married shave their heads off. And I'm just giving you an example how Polish Hasidim don't always get along from the woman point of view also. They look different in the sense that they are normal from the mainstream Haredi point of view.
It seems to me that the attempt to portray 19th century these parts of Jerusalem as sort of a Haredi environment is more of an anachronism. I mean, most, let's say, Orthodox Jerusalem, obviously by 19th century, and from my childhood, I remember, let's say, until 1970, was not dominated by Hasidic group. There were Karlin Court and Gur Court and Bell's Court, but the very core of all this area, Mea Shearim and Beit Yisrael and all these neighborhoods were not Hasidic, this is first of all. Secondly, the other people were not Haredi. They were not Haredi. There was this group of Ultra-Orthodox, you know, the descendants or the students of the Rabbi Moses Sofer from Pressburg, which fortunately or unfortunately, I am a descendant of one of them, who emigrated to Jerusalem by mid-19th century. But even they, not all of them adopted or inherited this, you know, or internalized this, you know, very strict ultra-orthodoxy worldview of the Rabbi Sofer. So I would say that we should be very, very careful in a way we use some notions and terms. And in regard to the second lecture, Minhag HaMakom, the custom of the place, in most cases, was not imposed by the local rabbi, but it was, let's say, emerged bottom up. Let me give an example. By the 13th century, Rabbi the Rosh, Rabbi Asher, came from Germany to Spain, to Toledo. And he was trying to change the custom, the local custom, or the local halacha, I mean, that after Pesach, you do not recite anymore the prayer for the rain. Well, according to his son's testimony, he was almost thrown out of the synagogue. People refused to change their custom because of, you know, the rabbi arrived and he decided on a new custom of the place. And in my forthcoming book about the community rabbinate in Eastern Europe, I discuss it once and again. We should remember that rabbis were hired by communities for 3 years, mostly 5 years, and they were very cautious in their relationships with the community. There was one exception which I found, the rabbinical contract of the Ger Rebbe. There, I mean, he is beyond everything. I mean, he does not have to live in the community and so on and so forth. But in general, coming back to the custom of the place, we should remember that that people who live there and customs are, you know, emerging through centuries because of all different reasons: social, economic, political, and so on and so forth. In some cases, rabbis try to change it, but according to my understanding and to my knowledge, very delicately, very cautiously. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll answer in two points. One is that there is, of course, a very big difference between the way the phrase or the term is used in the Middle Ages and in the recent centuries. And I think that part of what Ramah's enterprise was is to try to unite and unite the local custom of dozens or hundreds of local communities to one united Ashkenazi Minhag Glilot Elu. And he got a lot of criticism over that in his time, of course. And the second point is, of course, that the issue of the power struggle between a community and a rabbi is, of course, it's a big issue, and it's always part of the considerations of the game. But here, yeah. So here, first, it's a rabbi, and he's creating his own community in his terms, and also, as I said, I think there is a very big difference between the way the term is used and applied nowadays than it was used and applied previously.
Yehuda, just a quick comment and a question. So the comment is just, I was thinking also about the issue of women, and I would encourage you, if you give this talk again, which I hope you do many times, that you incorporate your answer about the women into the presentation itself. And Agav, I have a copy, or I've seen a copy of a special bracha that women say for the Heilige Mitzvah of shaving their heads and the things they ask for. And it's an amazing document that if you're interested, I can show it to you.
I would be very happy to give it over to my friend in London who's working on this. He wrote a book of a few hundred pages on this.
It's very interesting. I mean, you might have it already.
And he can't find the publisher, so...
But the question I have for you
scared.
is, when you're talking about how and actually yesterday we heard this a bit, the symbolism of those places, that they're not real places. I'm wondering how we incorporate what's happening right now in Chernovitz, that Ruzhin has completely renovated the Hof. It's gorgeous, by the way. It's stunning. And not just the Hof, they've bought up all the apartments surrounding the park right there. And as I understand it, they're planning on spending quite a lot of time there. And I'm wondering how you incorporate that into your thesis.
Just as I mentioned also, it could be that the return to the physical locations and the efforts emphasized by Hasidic groups recently, the last 10, 15 years, to go, as we said, mainly to cemeteries and kvarim, but also many Hasidim now are going back to the original shuls and trying to renovate them, and they come for a Yortzeit or Shabbos. Just last year, the Munkacher went to Dinov. They made a big thing there, and the Sadigero went to Sadigura, and the Rebbes are going back to the places, and they have good connections with the mayors of these little towns, and they work together. As a bit similar to this professor that spoke yesterday. It could be that, like some of these places, like for example, if the Borisov Rebbe with all his Hasidim will pay a visit and make a tish and a whole Shabbos in Borisov, the connection between the non-Jewish children that see these Jews from Israel so proud and carry the name and have a shul in Israel called Borisov. This is for them, it might be even a boost to their ego. And this cooperation, I think, can also, although Hasidim aren't usually the people who can talk about dialogue with Christians and youth, you don't have all that. On the other hand, symbolically speaking, there is maybe a very nice idea for a project here. That Hasidic groups that claim their origin from certain shtetl, not all, by the way, not all Rebbes have ever visited the towns they're named for, or have anything to do with it. Sometimes they buy the name. But that's also a different joke. But really, it's an interesting idea. Thank you.
Okay. One more, if there is a general question or general comment. If not, of course, you are invited to have a discussions and individual talks during the coffee break. Thank you very much. This interesting phenomenon, by the way, that somehow this reestablishing Hasidic life in Poland is just now. The Dinov is a primary example. Not only there is a big base medrash and the Moisdois, but there is a big piece of land already bought by the Hasidim. They bought houses or the pieces of land, and they are reinstituting the shtetl. We'll see what happens. Thank you very much for a very interesting session.
You mentioned Dinov, I'll just say that the Hasidus Dinov didn't exist since the Bnei Soscho. There was no such Hasidus. But because the Munkacher Rebbe's brother also wanted to become a Rebbe, he called himself the Dinover Rebbe. Hence, sometimes these shtetlach, they gain fame just because of some Rebbe was nifta, or some new Rebbe wants to become a Rebbe and create a Hasidic court, and he needs a name from Poland, so these Polish small shtetlach suddenly are on the map of Israeli life, or Bnei Brak or